Hey everybody, welcome to today's webinar. I'm going to give people 2 minutes to join, those who might be running a little late. So please sit tight and we'll actually start the session at 2 minutes past the hour. Hello again, everybody. For those who have just joined us, I'm going to go ahead and give people 1 more minute to join up. Some folks might be running a little late, so just going to give people 1 more minute, and we're going to go ahead and start at 2 minutes past the hour. All right, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. So welcome to today's webinar, CMMC policies and how to improve them. Just to let everyone know, so today's session is going to cover Exostar's product Policy Pro. If you'd like to follow along as David Rowe, my co-presenter, presents the product today, there is a Policy Pro trial available for free for 15 days. The link to sign up for that trial is in the YouTube description. It takes about 2 minutes to do this. We have a couple, if you will, some introductory material to cover before we start that portion of the presentation today. So if you'd like to go ahead and sign up for that and follow along, that would be extremely helpful to you and give you a better overview of the value that Policy Pro can bring to you and your organization. So with that said, a few housekeeping details before we get started. So today's webinar is scheduled to last about 45 minutes to an hour. That includes a Q&A. Those questions were submitted to the event prior to today. When you signed up, you were asked to let us know any questions you might have. Those are the questions we'll be answering today during the session. If there is an outage during the session today, please just wait a minute, refresh the page, and that should bring you back into the session. For your convenience, there is a link in the YouTube description to a glossary of commonly used terms, acronyms, and initializations that will be referenced during today's webinar. This webinar is being recorded. It'll be available on demand via the Exostar resource library. That can be found at www.exostar.com/resources. It'll be available anytime past this event. Also, if you want to see a replay, you can also click on the link you receive via email to YouTube, and that'll bring you to that same replay of the event. If at any time you'd like to speak with one of our industry experts, if you want to get a copy of the slide deck we used, you can reach out to us at cmmc-team@exostar.com. Also, if you go to our website, www.exostar.com, there is a live chat feature on any page you come to. You can certainly ask via that as well, and we'll get the slide deck over to you. So I'm joined today on my session by David Rowe. David is with ISMS Solutions. David, you want to take a minute to introduce yourself?
Hi, thanks, guys. My name is David Rowe. I am the Business Development Manager here at ISMS. I'm happy to be here and show you guys the platform.
Great, thanks, David. And we'll come back to David in just a few minutes. I want to present just some slides about kind of where we're at in the process of CMMC and NIST. So, this first one is kind of where we are in that current state. And often, and what I have been hearing, if you will, and what I realize in talking with a number of people across the defense industrial base is that there is some confusion right now about CMMC 2.0 and when it will take effect. Now, last year, we were taking the guidance from the Department of Defense that in March of 2023, that's when the interim rule for CMMC would be released, or when CMMC would be released as what's called an interim rule. Once it comes out in that designation, there's a 60-day public comment period, and then it gets finalized, and that's when you'll start to see it appear in DFARS clauses. It's my understanding now, let me go forward here, that there is some question, if you will, of what will happen when the CMMC proposal is actually submitted to the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget. There is obviously a federal rules making process, and that process is that it does go into the Office of Management and Budget, and that's where it will be given a designation of whether or not it is that NPRM, right, that notice of proposed rulemaking, or it gets that interim final rule designation. Since it hasn't yet been presented to OMB, the thought now is that initial step is going to be that NPRM statement. And if that's the case, you may very well see CMMC get pushed out, if you will, to either later in 2023 or even into 2024. However, the office in the DoD, and Stacy Bostjanek is the director of the CMMC office of the DoD. She, it is their intent to get that interim final rule designation, but that we will not know until it actually comes out. So there is still some indecision of when the rule will take effect. Now, with that said, right, there is still obviously things that you can do. So, what needs to be done today, if you fall under a DoD contract, or if you've got contract flowdowns from a prime that you're working with, please take a look at those contracts. And in those, you've got what are typically called DFARS clauses. These are the clauses from the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement that spell out what you need to comply with. If you've got those 7012, 7019, or 7020 clauses as part of your contract, you need to be compliant with NIST 800-171. The NIST 800-171 are those 110 controls across those 14 families that determine how you need to safeguard controlled unclassified information. If you've got that 7019 clause in your contract, one of the requirements from there is that you do a self-assessment of whether or not you're implementing those 110 controls. As you go through that self-assessment, there's a checklist that you go through, and if you've not implemented one of those controls, you've got a few things you need to do. First, you need to score yourself, and if you haven't implemented a control, you'll have either a numeric value of either a -1, a -3, or a -5, depending on the control itself. And so, as you go through those controls, you'll get a numeric score which you need to enter into that SBRS system that you see up there in the right-hand corner. That's the score you enter in that the DoD then sees, right? They're the only ones who see that score, but they're the ones who will see that score. And that tells them how you're doing in being compliant with the NIST 800-171 controls. As part of your output of that assessment is you'll generate what's called an SSP, a System Security Plan. And for those controls you haven't implemented, you should have a POAM, a Program of Action and Milestones of how you're going to address that control that you haven't yet implemented, and the actions you need to implement to implement that control, and then a person responsible and a date by which you expect to have that. And that assessment, the SSP coming out of that assessment, and that list of POAMs you have, if you haven't fulfilled all those controls, are the output, if you will. And that, again, generates that score that you enter into the SPR system. So that's what you've got to need. That's what you need to do today if you've got contracts that include the 252.204-7019 clause in that contract. As we switch over to CMMC, we often get a lot of questions about, well, what level of CMMC do I need to comply with? And really the thing to think about there is, what do you do today, and what do your contracts say today? What clauses do you fall under? So if you don't have DFARS clauses in your contract and you just have the federal acquisition regulations, right? In those cases, you typically don't receive or you won't be receiving controlled unclassified information. You'll just be having the contract information, right? That's the FCI, federal contract information. In those cases, there are 17 practices that you need to be able to adhere to be compliant with that particular clause. That's that level 1, right? These are all things that people should have in place who are working on or fulfilling particular federal contracts. Then, again, based on how on those current contracts that you've signed, that'll kind of tell you and give you that indication of what CMMC level you'll be looking to satisfy if you just want to do what you're doing today, right? So if you've got those DFARS 7012 clauses, right, then you're at a minimum a level 2, right? And you'll need to, again, you'll need to be compliant with those 110 controls. Rather than doing a self-assessment, you'll need a third-party assessment of how you're doing against those particular controls. And as part of those assessments, you need not only the fact that you're doing those, you need the written policies that say how you're going to implement that control. You need the proof, if you will, that you've implemented those controls. And you need, and somebody typically needs to explain to that agency or that group that's doing the assessment how they're implementing those controls. And then, the proof and the monitoring that you're doing that, you typically also need some kind of follow-up on how often you're reviewing those controls. And since this is a triannual assessment, you'll need to have somebody look at that every 3 years, but those self-assessments are typically a yearly thing as well. So that's what you've got to do, or what's coming once CMMC is implemented. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of both where you are today and what's coming with CMMC, even though we are still a little unsure of when actually CMMC will be implemented. So with that, I'm gonna pass it over to David to show you how Policy Pro can help you solve or assist you in determining how you're doing against those different controls and show you how Policy Pro can help you with that first step of creating those policies that you need for each of those different controls. So with that, David, I'll pass it over to you.
Kevin? All right, so like Kevin said, regardless of where your organization is in terms of getting compliance around whether it's NIST 800-171 or CMMC, Policy Pro was designed to help all levels of where you are. So whether that is having 0 policies and unsure where exactly to begin, or maybe you do have all of your policies, I'll show you exactly how you can use the tool in order to make sure you're ready for both CMMC as well as getting ready for what you need to be compliant with today. So we'll start off with using the Policy Builder. And the Policy Builder is a tool to help you create those policies utilizing our templates, utilizing our guidelines in order to build out those 14 different policies. So here on the left-hand side, you can see the 14 families, starting from access control all the way down to system and information integrity. The first time through the platform, you'll see this pop up here, and it's a brief explanation of policies as well as some of the other documents you'll need to create as part of that process of getting compliance around both NIST as well as for CMMC. So things like a POAM, if you don't have a POAM template, we provide one here, as well as an SSP template. Exostar does have another companion product called Certification Assistant, which Kevin will talk a little bit more about later, but we'll focus today's demo on policies. So we'll go ahead and close this pop-up out here, and that will take you to our Prepare, Gather, and Consult page. And this is everything you'll need to prepare prior to even writing the actual policies in the template itself. So for example, it will include things like gathering any sort of documents or records that your organization might have that's related to the access control policy. So it could be things like your documents or records related to your maintenance of your company's IT infrastructure. It could be things about your training, etc. And then the consulting portion is any internal or external stakeholders that you'll need to bring in as part of this process. So for example, it could include your network administrator, the head of IT or CISO, and then any sort of outside contractor. So those are going to be your MSPs or your MSSPs. If you are utilizing them, they would be involved in that process as well. So once you get to this page here, this is the actual policy template for access control. All of our policies are broken out into a couple different sections. We've got the header here, which includes your organization name, what department this policy falls under, the issue date for when you finalize the policy document, approved by, and then the tracking number can be used in a number of ways. However, most people use it to put in the version number of the particular policy you're working on. And then the other sections include the purpose, the scope, and the individual practices. So for those who are unfamiliar with how CMMC 2.0 is kind of structured, we've got those 14 broad policy families. In this example here that we're working on, it's access control. And then each policy is going to have a number of controls or practices associated to it. The total number of practices is going to be 110 practices for CMMC 2.0 Level 2. And so as you are working on the policies, you're going to work on each individual practice at a time. So we'll walk through an example here together. Access Control 3.1.1, which is about limiting information system access to authorized users, processes acting on behalf of authorized users or devices. Underneath each of the practice, you'll see some basic guidelines, and these guidelines will help you as you're crafting your policies in the template itself. So to open up the template, you'll click on the pencil icon located to the right, and that will bring up this pop-up here. So we are going to be writing about our organization's account creation policy, as well as our work from home and bring your own device policy. So an important thing to note as you're working on these templates is to customize it based on what your organization is currently doing or what your organization plans on implementing in the future. So again, the important part of writing these policies is actually fitting it to your organization. And in addition to that, you're going to want to pay particular attention to some areas that should definitely be customized. And so in here, the first paragraph, we've got all account creations will be submitted by the requesting department manager to the IT support email address for completion using the blank account request ticketing system or other processes. So here in the brackets, whatever process or system that is to create that account, that's what you would fill in here. Another section would be here in the second bullet. Systems administrators and members of the IT support team shall respond and act accordingly to requests within a timely fashion, offering at least a blank hour turnaround for account creation. So again, however long that takes your organization to actually create the account, that's what you would fill in into that section. So as you're working through these policies, make sure you're focusing on those key areas. Once you've finalized this particular policy, you'll click on the Save button, and that will save any changes you've made. If you do, for whatever reason, need to revert it back to the original, you can click on the Reset button next to the pencil icon, and that will reset just that individual practice. So assuming I've kind of gone through this entire process of working through each of the sections as well as the individual practices, I'll then go to the bottom here and click this Export button. And that's going to do a couple things. One, it's going to combine all of the sections I mentioned before, so the header, the purpose, the scope, and the individual practices into a singular document. And then it's going to save it as a Word document to my local hard drive. And that's going to be important for the next step of the process in the platform. Before I move on, though, for anyone who was a Policy Pro user in the past prior to our update to CMMC 2.0, you'll see your data, whether it's you worked on NIST 800-171 in the past or CMMC 1.0. You can click on the legacy data portion here and access your previous data. You can continue to work there, or you can migrate that information over to CMMC 2.0. The second piece to it is the policy assessment piece. And this is where you're going to ensure that the policy you've written has all of the necessary pieces to meet the criteria for whatever level or certification it is you're going for. So if it's CMMC 2.0 level 2, that's what you would work on here, or if you're going for that level 1, you can switch over to there. We'll go ahead and upload an access control policy together here and see how my policy is done. So we'll go ahead and attach this access control document and submit it for an assessment. So right away, we get that assessment. And one note before we actually talk about the assessment is here is where organizations who might be a little bit further along, so let's say you already have all of your policies in place and you just want to ensure that it has everything for CMMC 2.0. You can still upload those policies as well, so it doesn't have to be a policy created using our templates and policy builder. It can be any policy as long as it meets a couple criteria. One is that it follows the proper format, so docx, .doc, or PDF files. Number two is that it is relevant to the domain. So, it should be relevant to an access control policy if that's the section you're uploading into. So to see what your assessment is, you'll click here on this link to see your detailed scorecard, and that will bring up this pop-up. So we assess your policies in a number of ways. The document I've uploaded here, the overall assessment is that it appears relevant in size, scope, and organizational customization. The overall assessment is comprised of 3 different criteria. We've got the relevance, the model similarity, and the word count. The relevance is how many key terms or phrases your policy includes in relation to other terms you might have in the documents. The higher that is, the higher your relevance is going to be. The model similarity is comparing your document to our template documents, and we do that for 2 reasons. One, to ensure that your document that you've uploaded has been appropriately customized. Again, it's really important that you guys are, as you're working on your policies, that it fits your organizational needs as well as what your organization is actually doing. And then number 2, just ensure that's covering everything it needs to cover. The word count is just to ensure that it adequately meets the minimum word requirements or word count requirements. And that's important because to get an accurate assessment, it should be long enough to provide enough context in order to accurately assess the documents. The overall score here for this document is a 70.5%, and that is a couple notes about the overall score is that, one, it's not like an academic score, so meaning 90% as an A, 80% as a B. The overall score should be treated more as a threshold question. And so what I mean by that is anything above a 50% is a relevant policy document that you've uploaded. And I'll talk a little bit more once we get to another section in the platform about how you can use the overall score as you're working on updating and revising your policy documents. So we've talked a little bit about the different assessment portions of this particular policy, but how do I actually use this information to build and improve my documents as well as make sure I'm covering everything I need to cover? And that is through our Kenny system, or key elements not included. And we break that out into 2 parts. We've got the control Kennys here, as well as the general Kennys. The control Kennys are going to be these key terms or phrases that are missing in my policy document, and I should look to include it. The first example here in my policy is going to be CUI and non-public information. And underneath that, we can see the actual control that it's tied to. So in this case, it's going to be access control 3.1.22, controlling information posted or processed on publicly accessible information systems. Underneath each of the control Kennys, you'll see the security requirements and discussion. This is directly from the CMMC standard, so that way you don't have to flip and try to find that relevant section for 3.1.22. We provide it right underneath here. And then the documents for examination are going to be other documents or records or logs that your organization might have that can help you address that particular control Kenny. So it might include documents about lists of authorized users to post publicly accessible content. It could be procedures, it could be awareness training records. Again, any other sort of document your organization might already have that can help address that particular Kenny. Now, some control Kennys, for example, FIPS here, are going to be tied to multiple controls. So it's going to, for FIPS, it's going to be tied to AC 3.1.13, which is about employing cryptographic mechanisms, as well as AC 3.1.17, which is about protecting wireless access. So in those particular cases where a control Kenny is tied to multiple controls, you're going to want to address it in each control section that it's referenced in. The other section is going to be this general policy Kenny, and you'll notice that it's not going to have this collapse all, expand all button. And the reason for that is these key terms are important and should be included in your policy document. However, it's not directly tied to a control. And so where do these control Kenny or general policy Kenny terms come from? They come from our analysis of thousands of access control policy documents, as well as our work with auditors and consultants in the space. And these terms should be included in an access control policy in order to have the most comprehensive policy document that you can have. If you do prefer working on any of this information offline, you can export it into a PDF and share it with others, or you can add users into the platform to share those results as well. One other feature in the policy assessment piece I want to talk about before moving on is this management approval button. And the management approval button is going to do a couple different things, and I can show you exactly how you can use that in our dashboard. So the dashboard is all of my progress and work I've done so far in the platform. And it will show me all of the policies I've uploaded, all of the policies I've created in Policy Builder, as well as all of those assessment metrics I just mentioned. Let me just scroll down here, and we can see that my latest policy that I've uploaded here, as well as management approved, is in the green check mark. And it's going to have who the user was, as well as when they management approved it. So you can use it as an internal tracking tool, an internal audit tool, ensuring that everyone in the organization is using the most up-to-date policy. So you want to ensure that if you have different versions of the policy, that everyone is following the proper up-to-date policy, as well as part of CMMC requirements is that senior management or upper management has approved of these policy documents. So again, this is a way to track that, make sure that management has signed off on your policies. So as I'm kind of working through it, I'll also be able to see what standard it is I've uploaded into, as well as what level. Here in audit and accountability, the next policy over, I can see I haven't done any work whatsoever. However, in awareness and training, I have completed my policy. The next step, again, is going to be going into that policy assessment, uploading my documents, and working on revising those control Kennys and general Kennys, and then re-uploading that policy. So as I'm going through that process, I'll see that one, my control Kennys and general Kennys are going down, but also number two is on that overall score that I mentioned, one, I'll see that it's above 50%, showing that it's a relevant policy document. And then number two is I'll see that overall score trending upwards. So if I'm working on those Kennys, I should see an upwards trend in my overall scoring as well. One last piece to this platform is going to be the reference library. And the reference library is a list of helpful hyperlinks and resources across the web, mostly from the NIST Institute. And if you have any trouble, whether it's working on creating your policies in Policy Builder, or maybe you have a control Kenny or general Kenny that you're unsure of how to write into your policy, you can come here into our reference library. For example, maybe my control Kenny was related to VPNs, or maybe it was related to bring your own devices, and I'm unsure how to adjust that in my policy. I can come here and select the relevant section where it'll take me to the appropriate section. So that is the demo of the platform. We do hold weekly workshops on Policy Pro specifically as well. So if you're interested in that, or you have specific questions on the platform, feel free to join any Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern. Thank you so much, Kevin, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, David. Share my screen again with you. So Policy Pro is just part of Exostar's CMMC Ready suite. It includes also its companion product Certification Assistant. And if you're looking for an application that that'll help you jumpstart your compliance, as well as if you need a secure location to store your controlled unclassified information, Exostar's managed Microsoft 365 solution is a great starting point for you. If you're looking for a third party to help you determine where you're at and to do what's typically called a readiness assessment or that CMMC basic assessment, Exostar has a number of partners that can work with you and work within these different tools themselves to help you get ready for both the NIST 800-171 that is currently applicable, or CMMC once that is also released. So before we get to the Q&A section, just want to remind everyone, or encourage everyone, I should say, to please fill out the exit poll. You'll see that in the YouTube description. We use the exit poll first to let us know how we're doing and see if there are some suggestions on how we might be able to improve things. Also, it gives us an idea of additional things you'd like to hear about, and it will help us customize or prepare more relevant webinars for you. All right, let me pull up a few of our questions here. So the first one we got was about those DFARS clauses that I talked about. So it says to comply with DFARS 252.204-7012 in regards to storing controlled unclassified information in a secure cloud platform, does the product itself need to be FedRAMP authorized, or does the product using a FedRAMP authorized service for their storage suffice? So if you're using a cloud platform, or what's also called a cloud service provider, you want to look for that FedRAMP approval or a FedRAMP equivalent provider. And in most cases, the solution itself needs to be FedRAMP or FedRAMP equivalent. And the reason for that is it's not only that the application is hosted in an approved data center, or if you will, like a GCC high environment. If you're looking for a solution that's hosted up in Azure, in Microsoft Azure, the things wrapped around the actual delivery of that application or that service. So typically, most cloud providers have an operations team that manages the application, and a support team that you call, when you need help, etc. Those processes, procedures, people, etc., also fall under that overall solution. So typically, it's the solution itself that needs to be, not just the, if you will, the place it's hosted or where that solution is delivered from. Let's see. So the next question we got was, let's see, it follows along some of those same lines. So what version of Azure would you recommend for achieving compliance? Is Azure commercial an option? So, I may not be the best to answer this, because again, some of the messaging is a little mixed. So Microsoft itself, if you look at their checklist, they'll tell you that GCC High is the only environment that they will ensure is fully compliant with these standards. But I also have heard people that say, well, if you're using commercial, you can customize it yourself to fit those needs. So I kind of hate to say this, but it will depend both on kind of your expertise and your organization's expertise and your confidence in what you can and can't do. Sorry, I can't be a little more straightforward there. Let's see. It says, if we do not handle any controlled unclassified information, how many of the 110 controls of NIST 800 171 would be applicable to us? So if you're not an organization that receives, processes, or stores controlled unclassified information, then you're probably more likely to be a CMMC level 1 organization. So in those cases, you need to ensure that you have those, I believe it was 19 controls, that you satisfy to both handle and store federal contract information, the FCI. Um, so, but I would always check your contract, because it's not always about the information you receive. It's about what you've signed up for, just in case. Um, because if for some reason, as part of your contract, you do receive that controlled unclassified information, and you've signed contracts that require you, with the relevant DFARS clauses, then you would need to be prepared to do that. So just a little hint there. So before I go on with the questions, just want to give a little some additional information about Certification Assistant itself. As David mentioned, it is a companion product to Policy Pro, and the Policy Pro is where you build those policies for those 110 controls. But Certification Assistant is where you would say not only the policies themselves. So Certification Assistant walks you through each of those 110 controls, walks you through not only those policy statements or how you're implementing those, and their relevant policies, but also the artifacts that prove how you've implemented those policies. If you haven't implemented a policy, the creation and generation of the POAM for that, and then as I mentioned before, the actual scoring of how you're doing that. So Policy Pro and Certification Assistant can kind of be used hand in hand to both jumpstart and then also allow you to do a self-assessment of how you're doing today, allow you to generate both that SSP, that score you need, and the POAMs that are relevant if you haven't, if you don't have everything fully implemented. So let's see, let me get back to some questions here. I think I already answered the next one I got, because that was about the likelihood of CMMC will be finalized with requirements in March. It is still up in the air, right? I would say that the chances are, if I believe what I'm hearing, is that we won't see them finalized in March. It most likely will slip, but it really will depend on how the rules come out and what they're designated. So, please keep an eye out on those things. Please keep an eye on on the contract language that you're agreeing to make sure you're comfortable with the requirements that you need to fulfill. We got a couple questions about the policies themselves, right? And David kind of went through how Policy Pro works with those, how you can customize the templates that are provided, where those indications are of what you need to customize to more tailor those templates for your particular organization. But we did get some questions about how prescriptive do procedures and these policies need to be. And again, it kind of depends, right? They need to be as descriptive and or as procedural as you need them to be to explain how you actually do that particular control. So, for the one you see up here about domain access control, right? Limit access to authorized users and processes acting on behalf. So you need to be able to explain how you do that and what what you do to ensure you do that. So those are kind of that the detail needs to be down to opening that ticket with our IT organization using using email or some other ticketing system where people request these accounts for people within their organization. So it should go into that kind of detail. And then you also need that the artifacts that prove that. So typically, if part of your policy is that you use a ticketing system to request these accounts be created, you'll need to show some examples of people putting in those requests and those requests being fulfilled. And then you would typically have to show the application where those accounts were created and the types of different accounts that were done. So all those kinds of things, those don't need to be part of your policy, but they need to be part of the artifacts that prove how you're implementing that policy. And then we got one question about, well, what about a foreign company that's supplying things to the Department of Defense? And for those, it's my understanding that if you are a foreign company, you still need to comply with the CMMC or the NIST 800-171 requirements, right? Those clauses, those DFARS clauses, are still part of your contract, and they, and those are the things that you need to fulfill. And if you've got those DFARS clauses as part of your contract, right? If you've got them today, you need to be NIST 800-171 compliant. You need to have scored how you're doing, and you need to be able to, show that if you do get audited, not necessarily by or DoD is, it does have that audit ability through their DIBCAC organization to do those. So you need to be able to show that you're fulfilling those contracts. So we do have some upcoming events, right? As David mentioned, there is a weekly workshop about Policy Pro. And if you that is for the users of Policy Pro to come and ask those questions. We've got additional webinars at Exostar. You can find those at our events page and at our resources link. If you'd like to try either Policy Pro or Certification Assistant, we also have free trials of both of those available from our website. So some additional ability there for you to get where you need to be in this journey. So again, just a reminder, please fill out that exit poll. Always appreciate your feedback. And with that, that concludes the presentation today. I want to thank everybody for taking time out of your busy day to join us today. Really welcome those questions that were submitted before, and hope you'll be joining us at another webinar at a later date. Thanks so much.